Thank you. Good morning. I'm David Price. I am the Director of Insight and Analysis at IFPI. Who are we? We are the umbrella body, the trade organization for the recorded music industry. We promote the value of recorded music worldwide. We have 1,300 members across the world. That includes the big three recording companies, Universal Music Group, Sony Music Entertainment, Warner Music Group. We work through a system of national groups and affiliated organizations worldwide in more than 60 countries. IFPI Finland, Ant is here in the front row, Tom is here somewhere. We also work with CIAPC here in Finland, and I know Asko is hopefully in the audience somewhere. We have national groups in Norway, in Sweden, in Iceland, in Denmark. So across the Nordic countries, we're well represented. We have two major publications if you want to learn more about some of the work that we do. The Global Music Report is published every year in sort of May, April time. It is the Bible of music industry revenues. It will tell you exactly what is going on with recorded music consumption in more than 70 countries worldwide. It is the most authoritative source on sales and revenues within the music industry. Part of that report is available for free on our website. There's a more detailed premium report. We also published a couple of months ago the Music Consumer Insight Report. This is based on a survey of more than 13,000 people worldwide across 13 major music markets. And it will give you information on what people are consuming, how they're consuming music, what devices they're using, what they think of different services, how much they're using YouTube. All of these bits of information you'll find in that report. And it's really just skimming the surface of some of the data that we hold at IFPI. So where are we? Let's talk about numbers. Let's talk about figures. The music industry is finally returning to health. Revenues are starting to grow again. And I'll show you a chart in a moment which shows you just how long we've been in a period of decline. And we're now starting to see real shoots of growth. 3.4% growth last year is the first substantive growth in the music industry worldwide since about 2001. And it's an incredibly long period of decline and of losses. And it's the Nordics that are helping lead that growth. We have 3.4% growth worldwide this year, which is the first substantive growth in 15, 16 years. Within the Nordics, we've seen growth over the last 3 or 4 years in most countries. Last year, Finland 2.7%, Sweden 7%, Norway and Denmark up around 2.5%, 1.5%. And that's growth that's been consistent over the last 2 or 3 years. What's really important is to put this into context. And this is the long-term decline that I was talking about a moment ago. And you can see just how dramatic this is. Back in 2001, we were in an industry of over $23 billion worldwide. And that dropped by 40% over the next 15 years, down to well under $15 billion. That's a 40% drop. That's, I don't know any other content industry that suffered quite as much as the music industry from the advent of the internet, from piracy, from the advent of technology. This affected the music industry from top to bottom. Every single aspect of music consumption, music discovery, music curation, the devices people use to listen to music, all of this was wildly affected by new technologies, by new distribution methods, by the internet. What's even more fascinating from my point of view is to look at where these revenue sources are coming from. Back in 2003, where this chart starts, we were 100% physical industry. We had $20 billion coming through physical revenues back in 2003. This doesn't include performance rights and synchronization rights. This is all sales to the end user. And you can see just how much physical distribution, CDs, vinyl, other sorts, have dropped over that period. Now, that's a 70% decline just in 12 or 13 years. That's dramatic. And again, if you look at other content industries, look at the film and television industry, look at the gaming industry, they've adapted to the internet, but they haven't gone through this sort of change where the physical distribution of DVDs, of games, has changed by quite this amount. That's digital, excluding streaming. So this is digital downloads. This is sales of mobile ringtones, which is quite large in some countries. And you can see, physical is still a bigger proportion of revenues than this kind of digital revenue. Everybody talks about the music industry being a digital industry, but we still have a vast amount of revenue flowing into the industry through physical means. And that's streaming. Talk to anyone in the industry right now, and they will tell you streaming is the future. Streaming is where we're going to be. 5-10 years' time, we're all going to be streaming. And yet that's how quickly, or how recently, streaming has started to take effect. It's only in the last few years where we have really started to see streaming revenues pick up. Now, during 2016, this only goes up to the end of 2015, during 2016, streaming is going to start contributing more and more. We've started to see first-half figures from our major member companies. We've started to see first-half figures from a number of our national groups flow in, and it's streaming that is really starting to take a bite now. But it's only recently that this has really started to transform things. But, to flick through those, it's the Nordics that are leading that change. This is the split between physical revenues and digital revenues in the 4 Nordic countries that we have data for 2015, compared to global. On the global side, 2015 was the very first year where digital revenues exceeded physical revenues. We hadn't seen that before, despite how long downloads have been for sale, despite the advent of streaming in many countries, despite Spotify, despite Apple Music, despite all of these different ways of obtaining music digitally. Up until last year, physical was still bearing the brunt of most of our revenues. And you can see Sweden there, 85%, Norway, 83%, Denmark, 83%. These countries are way ahead of the curve on that transition from physical to digital. And if we then flick through and look at how much of that revenue is coming from streaming, primarily from streaming subscriptions, you can see just how far ahead Nordic countries tend to be than other countries in that switch, in that transition from old physical methods, from buying CDs, through to new digital methods, all-you-can-eat, on-demand streaming. And just look at how that compares to global figures. Under 25% of our revenue is currently coming from streaming. That's going to shoot up a little bit this year, in 2016. We'd expect to see that streaming area start to really take a bite more out of our total revenues. But it's worth bearing in mind. I mean, a lot of you here are going to be from music startups. A lot of you here are here to, we all recognize the value of music, but you're here to, really make money out of this. You're here to drive your own value and increase the value of music for others. And it's worth bearing in mind that while the music culture here in the Nordics is very much streaming-based, elsewhere in the world, we're still seeing a lot of downloads. We're still seeing a lot of physical. Don't limit your visibility to what's going on in your country. Bear in mind there is a whole range of different cultures out there who access music and consume music in very different ways. Look at Japan. Japan is the second biggest music market by revenue. Digital is a tiny proportion, and streaming, a really negligible portion. Spotify launched there a couple of months ago, is having a real trouble trying to get a toehold there. Again, this is some data from the Ipsos report that I mentioned earlier. This just shows how much the audio streaming is starting to take hold in a lot of countries. And you can see Sweden there, 61%. Mexico, surprisingly, audio streaming is particularly popular out there. Again, Brazil, Spain, Latin countries have taken to paid streaming very quickly. Korea, again, a country that pushed streaming and pushed downloads and pushed digital adoption very quickly. But then look at Japan. 11% of people in Japan using some kind of audio streaming service. These are completely different markets, completely different methods of music consumption. Compared to Japan to Korea, these countries are next door to each other. They have very similar cultures. Koreans love listening to Japanese music and consuming Japanese cultures. The Japanese love listening to K-pop. But the way in which they listen to it is utterly different. We could skip across to Germany, for instance. Compare Germany to Sweden, compare Germany to France. In Germany, people love their physical music. They love buying CDs. They love having some ownership, something that they can hold on to. The transition to digital there has been much slower. Maybe that's something to do with the fact that GEMA have only just agreed to a deal with YouTube to allow YouTube to start promoting content there. Maybe there's some method of seeding digital music into a country that has an impact. But you can see across this, and when you look across revenues across countries, the composition of music revenues, the way in which people are consuming their music, is completely different from one country to the next. This is smartphone usage, which tends to go hand in hand with streaming consumption. Where we see high smartphone usage, we often see high streaming consumption. They're twinned very nicely. When you've got everything you need in your pocket on your phone, the ability to have an on-demand streaming service gains more advantage, gains more sense. And it would also be remiss of me to stand up on a platform and not mention YouTube. Someone mentioned earlier the value of music and the way in which many online services have built their own value on the back of music. And we see this very much with YouTube. Over 80% of people worldwide consume music through YouTube. And where they're consuming music, they tend to be consuming music they already know. YouTube promotes itself as a discovery platform. It's the way in which you can promote your music, market your music. It's the way in which you can start to get heard. But when you drill down into how people are actually consuming that music on YouTube, they're not doing that particularly. They're going there and they're queuing up bands they already know. They're queuing up artists they already know. They're listening to playlists they've already created. And that discovery is almost a secondary aspect. And the problem with this is that YouTube isn't rewarding the artists correctly. It's not really giving any of the value that it gains for itself back to the industry. Running out of time, so I'll just go very quickly through the summary. The recording industry, we're starting to see signs of recovery worldwide. We're in an industry where the music companies themselves have reconfigured themselves more than any other content industry to meet the challenges of the internet, to meet the needs of consumers online, to make sure that we are delivering value to them in a way that they need. And truly, the music user experience through a smartphone, through a streaming service, is better than you can get for any other content industry. You've got Netflix, you've got Amazon, but they're giving you silos of content. There's nothing like Spotify or Apple Music within any other content industry. The value proposition there is incredibly good. And users are embracing that. And what you see here in the Nordics is one possible future for where we're going. It could be that in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, we're all 80, 90% digital. We're all 80, 90% streaming. And people are still going to want vinyl and still going to want CDs, and maybe some of them will be listening to cassettes by then. But this is one way in which we could go. But the cultures and the societies are so different that maybe we're heading for many different futures. Maybe what we see with the all-you-can-eat on-demand streaming here in the Nordics is just one way the music industry is going. And we need to be able to develop services and meet the challenges so that however people want to consume music worldwide, we're able to provide it to them. I'm going to stop there because I'm 1 minute over time. Thank you very much for listening. I'm around all day, so if you need it, have any questions, just come find me. Thank you.